Welcome, everyone, to Poets in Conversation. I'm Phyllis Klein, and with me today is Jed Myers and Charles Rafferty, um, and two amazing Grayson Books poets. And this is going to be the last reading that I do for the summer for a few months, and then we'll be coming back in late August. Today, I'm going to start with a poem of mine. And I was trying to figure out what to read. The news has been kind of depressing. So I decided to go with something that's in my book that's about pomegranates that grow on the tree right outside the window here. And so I brought in a couple of these. These fell off, so they're not really alive anymore. But that's what pomegranate flowers look like before they start to make the fruit. And so this poem is actually about harvesting them and bringing them around to everybody you can think of because we just have so many. And it's called Gathering. Our tree fertile with them, red fruited, multifaceted ornaments of pride, start as lipstick red flowers that drop into faded garlands, wreathing like a collar fallen to the floor. Red bulbs appear, harbingers for the fruit, hard shelled, pregnant, crimson seeded miracles. How did they get so large? And why are the seeds so hard to extract? It's been a dry summer, a drier fall, and yet here they are, so many we have to look for places to donate them. A homesick man named Igor from Armenia once climbed the tree for some, afterwards left a thank you note and packages of crackers and cookies from Trader Joe's. A neighbor comes this year with two kids, fascinated while cutting them off the branches, eager to begin the harvest of scarlet cells called arils. Friends graciously receive too many, send to the East Coast in a box, make jam, bread, put on salads, bring to other neighbors. Everyone set to whacking at them. Our kitchen a crime scene, splayed with the stains of ruby juice. Persephone visits our dreams, she who sacrificed to give us winter, shadow days, blizzards of rain, a cleansing. The ways we try for redemption. The tree a skeleton now, still a few offerings left on otherwise vacant limbs. So many years, such faithful service. During the dark times, beacon of magenta, of vermilion. So now I'm going to introduce Charles. Um, and I couldn't decide who was going to read first, so we flipped a coin. Um, so Charles Rafferty has many collections of poetry, and I have some names of them: "Smoke of Horses," "Something an Atheist Might Bring Up at a Cocktail Party." Those are the two that I have. And he has lots of publications, and he also writes short stories that have been published widely. And he currently directs the MFA program at Albertus Magnus College and teaches at the Westport Writers Workshop. And tonight he's going to read from two books, actually. The one that I have written down here is The Problem with Abundance, which is the one that Grayson published. This one is just a brief way of describing it is gives us imagery-rich poems with quick turns and an unflinching gaze at the modern reality of our existence. And then I asked Charles and Jed to write me some more introduction that was a little personal. So this is what Charles said. In addition to being a writer, Charles Rafferty is also an explorer of the woods, swamps, and rivers near his home in Connecticut. He has become a mushroom hunter this past year and has been spending as much time possible looking for arrowheads and bioluminescent fungus. So I'll hand the microphone over to you, Charles.
Great, thank you, Phyllis, and thank all of you for coming out for this reading. Jed and I were talking before all of you came on, and we were talking about Leslie Mcgrath, who actually chose Jed's book for the Grayson chapbook contest. And Leslie recently passed away. She had some horrible cancer. She's somebody that I've known for a while, but I've fallen out of touch with. And we both thought it would be nice to read one of her poems. So I'm going to read a poem from her book, Opulent Hunger, Opulent Rage. She's a fantastic poet. And this is one that I find really pleasing. She has a good way of being sexy about writing about food. And this is called The Soda Bread. I left a soda bread for you wrapped in a blue tea towel on the cutting board, a crock of sweet butter and your favorite knife, its serrations worn to gentle scallops. I want you to come and hold it to your cheek, the way you laid your head on my ripening belly years ago, to feel our child's flutter kick. Place your palm in the moist circle the bread leaves on the board. Remembering the humid summer night, you lifted the coils of hair from my neck, tipping my face moonward. Cut a piece thicker than I'd cut for you and drag it through the butter. Taste the yeast, the currants, the buttermilk. Taste the salt from my hands. Which I've always loved that poem. So sorry to see you go, Leslie. I want to shift gears and read poems from the book that Grayson published now, which is called The Problem with Abundance. And all the poems in this collection are prose poems, which is a form that has captured my attention for at least 10 years now. And I don't really know what attracts me to them so much, except that I feel like I can be wilder in a prose poem than I can in any kind of lined or traditional form poem. And there's probably no rational reason for that, but I feel like I'm not going to stop writing prose poems until I start kicking up failures. Because it's working for me now, I'm sticking with the prose poems. And I'll read a few of them to you now. And I'll start with the first one in the book, which is called Greetings. I counted the water towers. I counted the active smokestacks. These were the breadcrumbs I thought would lead me back. Now I know it's possible to drive so far, we forget why we left, that the journey continues even after the car breaks down. I used to think I had no message. But the message is me, bloodshot and hungry, spilled coffee down the front of my shirt. People of the future, gather round. I have traveled through ink to greet you. I'm going to apologize in advance that I don't have a lot of snappy stories behind the compositions of my poems. So I'll just launch into them. Rapid fire, if that's okay. And this one is called The Pond. The world is in short supply. This field of goldenrod will never be enough, and the ocean feels suddenly crossable. In every apple an orchard waits, but who has 20 years to cultivate it? Above our house, the contrails of the jets have turned into actual clouds. The rain they promise is another lie. Meanwhile, The taste of my blood implies that I am rusting, that a broken machine lies half submerged in the pond I carry with me. And this one is called A River of Birds. A river of birds filled the sky above the house. It went on for days. That many animals can't be wrong, he reasoned, as he waited for the frost to blossom. He thought about his prospects, a half tank of gas, the cabinets full of soup. Later, when the river went dry, he endured its blue and empty channel. The birds that remained were different. They shook once against the cold. They sat on the wires and looked down on him, undeterred by the lack of bounty. Marbles. At a certain point, manic depression became bipolar disorder. The world has always been in flux. Just look at the sky. There are fewer stars now than when I was a boy. I cannot say who took them. I cannot remember the pictures that they made. Consider Istanbul. It used to be Constantinople, and before that, Byzantium. Nothing endures. I had a jaw men wanted to punch. Now the ground I stand upon feels like it's made of marbles. In Wyoming, they've just begun hunting the grizzly bear again. It is finally safe enough to be killed. I can't get over it. My teeth were once a dazzling white. All three of my brothers were living. The Roman names. Zeus became Jupiter and so forth. That was the first diminishment. Then Christianity seeped in and cracked the boulder of Rome. When you lose territory to the god of meekness, it's hard to keep your swagger. The temples fell into disrepair. The ash on the altars washed away. True, the planets still bear the Roman names, but how many of us notice them as we're taking our taxi down the Esplanade? How many of us are certain that they are not merely stars? I'm going to read a poem about prose poems, at least in part. The poem is called Ars Poetica, and I guess I'm talking more than about the art of making poems. I'm also commenting on the status of poets in America. And the only thing I think you need to know about this is that, well, first of all, I should explain what a prose poem is, which is, it's just a poem that's presented in lines, as if it were a paragraph. And the other thing you need to know is that I mentioned the euglena, which is this tiny, I don't want to say it's unicellular, but it's a tiny paramecium-like animal, but it's actually part plant and part animal. It has all the characteristics of a paramecium, but it also has what are they called? What are the things that do photosynthesis? Chloroplasts. So it's part plant, part animal, which has intrigued me. So I'll read this to you, and it's in 9 parts. It's called Ars Poetica. I used to think of the prose poem as a mule, a sterile hybrid. Now I see it as a euglena, that cutthroat survivor with a foot in 2 kingdoms. 2. Every good poem has form. To say otherwise is like saying some water doesn't have temperature. 3. To have successful poems over the long haul, you must be the kind of person who dusts the furniture when there is no hope of visitors. 4. Write every day. No one can shoot a nickel off the back of a galloping ox with just 1 bullet. The most 1 bullet will get you is a dead ox. 5. Beware of autobiography. The thing that is most accessible is not always the best material for a poem. There's a reason the pyramids were not constructed of sand. 6. Some poems fail because of just one word, as troubling as a hornet on the railing of a crib. 7. The impulse that begins a poem is almost never strong enough to finish it. The poet must let go of what ceases to be useful, like laying down your walking stick when the crags turn into plains. 8. A first book is like gristle coughed onto the dining room table. Getting it out allows you to keep breathing, but nobody wants to pick it up. 9. Poets in America are fourth magnitude stars floating above Manhattan, with everyone's night vision ruined by Instagram and football. And I'll read a couple of poems by The Smoke of Horses, which are also included in the chapbook Diminution. And these are all prose poems as well. And the first one I want to read to you is a poem that I swear it came to me when I was 19 years old and I took my intro to philosophy class in college. And, you know, the first sentences of the intro to philosophy professor were basically the opening line of this poem. And it just blew me away that these names that I'd been hearing all my life were so closely connected. And so I'll read it to you now. It's called Diminution, which just maybe is a fancy word for just things getting smaller. Diminution. Socrates taught Plato, and Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, who founded a city that would house the most voluminous library of the ancient world, until it was burned, until forgetting came back into vogue. The great minds come down through the years like monkeys descending from high branches. Always a leopard is waiting to greet them in the tall grass, among the magnetic berries, in the place they should have checked. Just take a sip to wet my whistle. This poem is called A Demonstration of How One Thing Leads to Another. He steps onto the train and realizes he's missed his stop as he wakes at 40,000 feet above the Andes. He tries to ask the stewardess when they'll land, but by the time he's formulated his question using the English to Spanish dictionary he must have packed that morning, he finds himself in the back of a taxi cab faltering through Buenos Aires. I'd better phone the office, he thinks, but already he is in the lobby of his favorite brothel being handed a glass of whiskey. Just one couldn't hurt, he says to himself as he closes the door behind him and turns to see a woman with her dress in a bunch above her waist. He feels suddenly like he's kneeling at the fountain of unquenchable desire. His lips crack painfully, even as he quaffs her over and over until he wakes inside his wife back in Connecticut atop their heavy sleigh bed, the one he purchased on credit and a whim, and for which he threw his back out as he hustled it up the stairs. And I'll just read two more. Let's see. This one is called The Man Who Bled Wine. The strange part is that he bled Chardonnay, not the more likely Pinot Noir, and it was cold to boot. He found this out as he was cutting shallots into translucent fingerprints and instinctively sucked out the wound. It was good, so he squeezed his thumb above the nearest wine glass and the bell of it grew foggy. He imagined how women would want him at their parties, a neat little trick by the dessert table, a reason to smack their lips. All night long, he'd hand those women a brimming glass of himself, an invitation to taste what his veins had hidden. He would be dizzy by the end, and he would have to learn to live with it, his concentration suddenly unreliable, like a watch that had been through the wash. He decided it would be best to arrive with bread and cheese, some kind of sliceable meat, something to keep him going, to stay alert as they savored the body, the must, and the finish from the cask he had now become. And the last one I'll read, it mentions remoras, which if you've ever watched like Shark Week, there are these like sucker-like fish that hang around on the larger sharks and basically eat what falls out of their mouths. So I don't want to call them parasites. I don't think that's the right word, but they're opportunists. And this poem is called "The Saddest Bid for Immortality Ever Devised." I used to transcribe my poems on the blank pages of books by famous poets. I imagined they would ride into the future like remoras, suckered to the belly of a powerful shark. But the librarian would always find them and black them out. Later, she resorted to excising the vandalized pages with a ruler and a blade. Those stubs at the end of Paradise Lost in the Mount Laurel Public Library, that's me. And that's it. Thank you. You've been very patient.
I don't think patience is really what I would say about it. Wow. Well, yeah, I see a lot of applause. Yeah. Wow. Charles. So do you want to say anything before we go on? You want to just talk for a minute? Like people are writing some things in the chat. Let me just say, so you prove that poetry can be very entertaining. Yeah. What do you think
Well,
about
thank
that?
you. Thank you so much.
That's a compliment. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
How do you,
absolutely. Thank you.
I mean, we're going to talk about how do you come up with the stuff? I mean,
Well, I write every day. I get up and I write for a couple of hours. Well,
oh,
maybe not a
wow.
couple of hours. I try to do it. Lately, the day job has been killing me, but usually I can put at least an hour in a day. And I just doodle. I write until I say something that interests me. And then I just try to tack other sentences on that I find interesting. So a lot of the way I've been writing lately is just like free writing for an hour and then coming back to it and saying which are the sentences that are interesting in and of themselves, and then seeing which will attach to each other. And I'm really attracted to the idea of a non sequitur. It's something that doesn't seem to go well, and yet by the end of the poem, it's no longer a non sequitur. If
Oh
that makes
boy,
any
yeah.
sense.
Like I can think of, I was trying to write some of them down in the chat just because the most one bullet will get you is a dead ox.
Wow.
Yeah, Jed, you want to say a few things before
Well,
we move
I'm
on to
I'm really stimulated because Charles writes so differently from I do, and I break some of the guidelines that Charles goes by, and so the complementarity is kind of making my head spin right now. It's very exciting, and I just love Charles' poetry. I just love it. It makes me, like feel more alive. I mean, what you can't beat that. It's just wonderful. So witty, brilliant, and not just witty. I mean, there's a lot of tolerating the pathos of life that comes with the stir of his work, which I think is marvelous. Yeah.
You're very kind. Thank you. I really
all
appreciate it.
true.
Seriously.
So just a couple more comments and then we'll go on to Jed. Interesting. So Myrna says, interesting is the word, very creative and most enjoyable. Thank you. And let me see. Wonderful. Hiram is here. Wonderful, wondrous travel in these poems. And speaking of travel, we have people from all over the place. So I think we have somebody here from Scotland, actually.
Is Cicely here?
I think so. Yeah. I see Cicely's iPad. And I know there are people here from California and people from New York and Connecticut and Washington. So yeah, so wow. There's Cicely. Hi. Yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, I think it's 11 p.m. there. Is that right? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Oh.
You can tell us later. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. So I'm going to introduce Jed. Another big treat coming up here. So Jed lives in Seattle, and he's got a lot of books too. Watching the Perseids, The Marriage of Space and Time. I just love the book titles. I think we could write poems just using the book titles people have. That would be fun. And 3 other chapbooks. He's got a lot of honors, just like Charles. And one of the things he's doing now is a poetry editor for the journal Bracken. And if we have time and we think of it, you might say a little bit about that. So let's see. And he's going to read from the prize-winning chapbook, the 2019 Grayson Books chapbook, and then another one as well, right? Another book of yours, yeah. So,
And a couple of more recent things that aren't in anything yet. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, cool, very cool. We like recent things too. So let's see. So, Leslie Mcgrath wrote a blurb on the back of the book. Maybe I'll read that later. So here's what Jed says about himself. He was born in Philadelphia in the 1950s and first developed his poetic ear to the sounds of AM radio doo-wop. He studied poetry as an undergrad and then trained in medicine and psychiatry. He's lived in Seattle for many years, where he's raised a family, maintained a solo therapy practice, and taught on psychotherapy at the University of Washington. He's author of 2 full-length poetry collections and 5 chapbooks. He thrives on long walks along local creeks and shorelines. With his companion, the writer Alina Rios, he gathers mushrooms in the woods in the rainy seasons. And so this is something that you also have in common here with Charles.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I don't know if you have any mushroom poems, but take it away.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you. I was just saying that I'm so happy that people I know have come and they've gotten to hear Charles. And now I'm thrilled that I get to read also. And it's very cool that he and I both have gotten into mushroom hunting. Go figure. Um, Love's Test is the book that the chapbook that Leslie Mcgrath picked of the entries to Grayson Books that year, and I'm going to start with the first poem in that collection. It's the title, Love's Test. There is no title poem in the collection, but the phrase is used in 2 poems, and you'll hear it twice. First poem, Proof. Late last night, wasn't much to it. 2 earthlings floating our dreams in one bed. Though it left us plenty of proof. Didn't we shift and touch under the dark's one cover, shuffle our sleeps together in the gusts of each other's breath, then slip again deep into singular drifts? I remember your forehead against my neck, your arm on my chest. You kept my knee a while between your thighs, and I roused a little to the wind in the trees of your inhalations. No more than this, all the proof we'd need to know throughout the rest of our lives we had passed love's test. And why doesn't once convince us? As the night lifted off to its dawn death, it left us a certain scent, evidence it had mixed our humors, stirred us a oneness. Then the light scoured us separate, our senses' confluence lost. We showered and dressed in our doubts. It suggests we'd learned next to nothing. I think I write a lot about time and mortality, but I think everybody does. It's nothing unusual, and that's what we need to write and listen about and connect about. So this is a poem that comes out of the experience of my mother's dying. My brother was there at the time. I was across the country. But this was vouchsafed to me by him, and I hope he doesn't mind my having rendered it in a poem. It's called From What My Brother Could Say. He had to insist till they'd do it, pull all the tubes. It took them long minutes, and after he watched her mute, teeth-baring, her head bent back on a madly arched neck, bleached hair deranged to a froth, her chin jutted up from the raised bed like a skyward bowsprit, and an arm worming above her as if to probe fog. He stood, and the blood drained out of his head. He sweated. He heard her gasps grow slower and whine like a rub against some narrowed resistance inside. Or it was the siphoning sound of inhaled air leaving his chest through the fresh tear in his life. He left. The hall echoed and clanged. A nurse came and went. She told him it was all right. His mother was good as gone. He thanked her, but says there are nights her breath hinges on. A friend and I years ago both kind of went with our families, took our families down to Oregon to the Nautilus River. It's a great trout fishing river, a fly fishing river. And we sort of caravanned back in our two vehicles with the families, and we stayed one night near Mount Hood. And this poem eventuated from that. It's called Night on the Way Back from the Nautilus River. We talked out our blues to the dark, backs to a log. Seated on dirt, the summer'd dried out. Before us, the trees, like silhouette curtains, parted. The starry backdrop went back and back, a oneness of distance and time, what had cast us all out on our world lines. We had parked our families in the motel by the road, glad for a walk out into the dusk, chance for a smoke, maybe a tavern's red sign glow among the conifer trunks as we scuffed gravel shoulder around the long bend. There was no tavern, but a dirt road to a small lot, someone's not yet cabin, and without discussion we'd sat down for the show. Night, what can it know? For all the time it held in its view, it told us nothing. Not how in years we'd be out of our houses, out of the blame showers, immersed in the lulls and surges of uncertain touch, wanderers like when we were young but old. Could the night have said there's another road, shown the invisible need in love's angry bed, turned us toward, not away? I wonder, with all the star theaters, space before us, for all our talk of our thwarted urges, what if the dark spoke we'd have heard? There's another poem I'd like to read it's called Love's Home, Love's apostrophe home. possessive apostrophe home, and it's really a poem about getting old and living with someone younger. The body emits. I remember my mother gathering up the sheets as I stood by the bed, convinced I was worse than useless. She hid her grimace as best she could. Then there was blood, red ooze at the knee as I'd done it again, careless, her wince as she daubed it, cotton wet with Bactine. And the cries, so often storming up from the lungs to force open the grit gate of teeth. It's impossible not to emit, not to press love to its tolerance limit. How is it I checked my gag each time as I mopped my kid's chin and chest again with the rinsed rag? And wasn't there the elder who fell as he sat where you'd removed the chair? Scalp, a shell cracked on the floor, it dripped. You fled, didn't help. And hadn't a matchbook flared in the old man's palm, that weeping crater in flesh, a terror, a wish he'd never touch you with that hand again? Haven't we each, more than once, failed love's test? And as I get old, I'll emit more, not less. The whimpers and fluids and breaths we've dreamed we controlled while it was chaos taking its time with us, till it exceeds your threshold. I can't wash or shower or wipe fresh any part of myself enough, and you, young lover, will have had enough. Like my mother, her hour every 2 days or so in the chair in the far corner of my father's last room. The tumor inside his skull insisting his body emit every last thing. Or is there a turn? If you fall first, is it in me to change the soaked surgical dressing? Or you might learn, by love's stubborn duration alone, this concoction of sense, this collage of the unhealable wounds and their seepages, must prove at last endurable. This is love's home. I want to read one more short poem from this collection. It's the last poem in the book, and it's called At Last. And I discovered this morning, I'm reading it on pretty much the anniversary when I wrote it 6 years ago. The allium blossoms are popping out with their purple starbursts right out my window. And here we are again, at last. Good now, this bed and you in it. No hurt in my hip, just the trick elbow I can't prop myself with. And I get to hold you and I get excited like a kid with fewer nights left than lived. I can't keep it under my breath. You'll detect the grunt whisper. It presses up out of my chest. At last, I am embarrassed to expose this interior nakedness more than to let you explore all my faulted skin. At last, we've fallen here, out of our pasts. Each had our manic egg and seed dance, our thrash through the marital bramble, our bitter oak table settlements, unwitnessed internal bleeds. Here, the elegant firework purple allium burst on its long stem, set in a glass flute for you on the nightstand. Faded a little these few days since it's severed. The seasons advanced. I can't imagine this blossom replaced. And in appreciation and gratitude and kind of awe, with respect to Leslie Mcgrath, I want to read a short poem of hers. It's in Ars Poetica by Leslie Mcgrath. To have even a lotto chance of getting somewhere within yourself you don't quite know, but feel, to cling to the periphery through the constant gyroscopic redrawing of its provinces, to make what makers make, you must set aside certainty. Leave it, a lumpy backpack, by the ticket window at the station. Let the gentleman in pleated khakis, pressed for time, claim it, the certainty, not the poem. Let me at this juncture also say that, our Grayson author, Phyllis, has a wonderful collection. The Full Moon Herald, a Grayson Books book, and of which, on the back cover, Jack Riddle says her work is what Ezra Pound called poetry, the news that stays news. And she's been honored with an honorable mention from the Eric Hoffer Awards in the poetry category. I recommend the collection to you. I've been reading it in the last few days. I'd like to read a couple poems from another 2019 collection, a full-length collection from Moonpath Press. It publishes Northwest regional work. I'm very, very happy to have this book accepted and published by Moonpath. And the cover title, The Marriage of Space and Time, is a kind of a play on William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. I needn't say more for the moment. I read a poem earlier about my mom's passing. This is a poem about my dad's passing. I was back in Philadelphia to see him for the last time a few days after before he died. It's called Two Men Saying Goodbye. It was clear he was down to days. My printed boarding pass declared U.S. Airways Terminal B next morning. Should I leave, I'd miss his eyelids parting less and less, the gaps between gasps lengthening, and the last reflex kiss at the Diet Pepsi's straw. As he blinked at me, I believed he saw someone he loved. I wouldn't go so far as to say son or father, but a glow of his own life in me. My brother would stay. Oh, he'd have to sleep at his condo, deal with a few things early each day, but he'd be back on hand at the bedside rail. He'd hold the old man's head up to help him sip the cold from the can, while the fever of brain swell rose till the burgeoned gel pressed the breath drive closed. My brother would stand there while Mom sat by the window and dozed. I'd fly back to my coast while Dad lost the last shred of sense. I intoned Shalom Aleichem to him as I turned, peace be upon you, as it was offered in doorways and on the streets where he was a boy. Eyes widened, he called out that ancient goodbye we'd never said to one another. Who were we then? My shoes struck loud on hard floor, down the hall, past all those rooms. One more poem from this collection. It doesn't have a title poem, but the cover uh, shows prominently the long arc of a young woman's neck, and the resonances with the title of this poem, Geometry of the Orbits, the long arc of the orbits. Geometry of the Orbits. Did we speed up the stars? Night's over. You've risen. What can I savor? Those high notes the birds usher a close. And the crocuses already gone. Have I shown you one? One dawn will be the last. The catch in my throat, a choke on the wind. We're at the prow of a fast boat. Or the heart's own sharp minute hands clicked past, nicking the larynx, a little clock joke. I did kiss the back of your neck. Its arc belongs to the long geometry of the orbits. There, the endlessness. And we are permitted peeks into the black behind each other's irises. I'd like to read a couple much more recent poems, if I may.
How about maybe one more?
One more will be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Gotta save some time.
Well, just for the conversation, yeah.
Yeah. Let's make it a really recent poem called Our Own Thievery. In a small room, on a disheveled bed, we held each other, whispered, and laughed. We let the light fall on our city and disappear under the streets in that whirlpool we never see where all this floats. Did we notice the curtains shifting in the open window? We barely listened to the soft flapping sounds of the cloth on frame and sash. We allowed for the wind as for the erratic moods of a world long at scattered war. And too soon the light was diminished. A chill had slipped in. Our couple hours of timelessness closed with a savory finish as we rose and dressed. We'd permitted the rest of existence to turn on itself as it would. Had we heard the Sunday papers' loose pages lifting on the intrusive gusts? We had done nothing while half hearing that overexcitable dad explode again 2 doors down. Nothing but gone on teasing low sighs and moans and bursts of simple words from each other with strokes of touch and little jokes. Hadn't we registered even those sirens that keep calling out from the university district? We hadn't thought the loose fence slaps could be gunfire down there. Look at us, uncrippled in any discernible way, just heartsick with our own thievery. We stole the day, licking the light off each other's shoulders, and we'd siphon the stars down our throats. Thanks.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, let's everybody unmute now. What a delicious meal. Let's give them
Yeah,
both.
nicely done. That was a fantastic finale. I love those last lines of that poem. The licking the light off each other's shoulders is fantastic.
Glad to hear. Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
Wowie. Wow. Well, we've got some comments here. I'll start with those, and then let's converse. So Charles, you wrote great rhyming in an unrhymed poem. honest details, such honest details. I agree. Um,
Ah,
Very moving. I love the careful reading, almost musical voicing of the poems. Thank you. Jed's poems glisten a deep silvery gray. Wow, Hiram.
oh.
Wow. Well, goodness, there's so much to think about. I was wondering if when we were planning this, the two of you were having such a great conversation in the planning. So so I wonder if there's any way that we could start there, just like have the two of you kind of talk to each other about your poetry, and then while you're doing that, I'll look at the questions that I wrote down. So
Well, um, yeah, I can't remember now what we were talking about in the planning meeting, but
no worries.
regarding that poem where I can't remember the name of it now, Jed. My apologies, but I was following along in the book, and I was like, oh, I'm hearing all these rhymes, but none of them are in the usual places, and I actually love that about a poem. I certainly have nothing against rhymed poetry, but I like the surprise of finding rhymes in places where I don't expect them.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they're actually truer rhymes.
Yeah.
In the perfect poem, the any rhyme sound is trying to direct the reader's attention towards what's important. And I feel like when people rhyme poorly, they're just shooting for that
Yeah.
form, like the sonnet. It's got to be A B A B or whatever.
Right.
And they do that as if they were filling out a job application. But I don't get that sense in your poetry. The rhymes feel deliberate, and they feel like they're emphasizing the right words.
I appreciate hearing that from you and with your ear. And I'm resonating with what you're saying. I write sometimes formal stuff, but it's very difficult to not have it sound too like bam and then bam and then and the hard rhyme, the full rhyme, it kind of hurts a contemporary ear somehow. I like off rhymes, part rhymes, and I think one writer who does this magnificently again and again, A.E. Stallings. She knows somehow how to make it authentic, genuine, real, meant, honest each time, and she won't leave it there if it isn't. That's my sense, and I
Yeah.
admire her work tremendously in that zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Stallings is great, and Kay Ryan is another one that does it well,
Yes.
and of
She
course
rhymes
Dickinson.
her ass off, and it's fabulous. Like, how does she do that, right?
So does anybody in the room have anything about rhyme that they want to say? Ginny says those rhymes make a poem musical, but not sing-songy.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyone else, like in your own writing or what you heard today? Oh, Perry, you're muted now.
Yeah, I was just going to say that that's one of the funs of writing, when the subconscious does it and you don't even know it's doing it. And then when you have the poem written, you go, oh, look at that. It's such a wonderful surprise because we rhyme sounds. We don't have to rhyme whole words, but we do rhyme sounds. And then often they twin each other. And
Yeah.
our subconscious,
Yeah.
is a great asset to our writing. Our unconscious. So I enjoyed both of your poems immensely, and what's your first name? Rafferty. What's your first? Charles. A question I had is, as I listened to your poems, I thought they were as much poetry as prose poems. You said, prose poems give you more flexibility, but I heard many of them as poems.
Oh yeah, I definitely want them to be as poems. For me, the only distinguishing mark of a prose poem is that it's not broken out into lines.
Right. I heard a great definition of a prose poem once. Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
A prose poem is where you have one foot in prose and another in poetry, and both feet are on banana peels.
It's very good. Yeah.
That is
But
nice.
see, I'm impressed that Charles's work has wonderful rhythmicity, wonderful cadence,
Right.
and the cadence and the words and the meaning, they fall together. Like it's just great poetic speech.
Right.
It's wonderful. You get it just by reading it. It's there. It's well scored without line breaks.
Well, thank you very much. And the more I think about it, I mean, it's always a problem to figure out, like, when is a poem done? When can I put this thing aside and call it finished? And the older I get, the more I think it entirely comes down to rhythm. I almost don't care what the poem even means or what it's trying to say, but
Wow.
its rhythm is what persuades me to say yes to it. I don't care about the ideas behind the
Yeah.
poem. It's got to be rhythm. And I got to like saying it. I want to feel it coming out of my mouth and saying that feels good, releasing it from my mouth, which I know sounds hokey,
No,
but
no.
that I think that's the whole thing now. I may think differently in 5 years, but
Donald Hall said that when he starts a poem, he starts with the sound of it, the sound of it, the sound of it. He said it to me a bunch of times. It's like, do that, wonderful. Same thing you're saying. Wonderful. Yeah.
I have a question for Charles.
hey,
Yeah.
Mark,
The conversation here is, about the sound and the sound of the poem. And, often, we're often reading them and hearing them. And it's a great blessing to hear them read. And I'm wondering, do you, as you're writing in the morning and you're searching for, that phrase, that sentence, that magic when things come together, do you read it aloud, or is it mostly kind of a solitary? I guess this could also be for Jed or Phyllis. Just, do you often just take a break and stop the writing, which I imagine is pretty silent, and say it, or is it mostly a quiet experience?
because I'm writing at like 5 a.m. I'm not like declaiming the poems because I just wake up everybody in the house, but I'm always mumbling them. Like I'm not saying them aloud like the way I am tonight, but I'm definitely saying them like blah, 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 at that level, because I'm serious. If it doesn't feel good inside of my mouth, it's not. It's a crappy poem. I don't care how interesting the idea is. It has to just flow perfectly, which I know is like a non-quantifiable thing to talk about, but I know it's right when I hear it. The same way you can tell if there's a note wrong in a song, you might not know anything about music, but you can tell when there's a sour note, and I can tell when I've got a sour line. Like there's some weird hesitation, and I just keep trying it different ways until I get to a way that sounds perfect in my mouth, for lack of a better definition.
I agree completely. I mean, my companion Alina, if I get a little too loud in my mumbles, she looks at me. She says, "Can you keep it down a little bit?" Like I'm concentrating on this. It's a noisy process a little bit, right? Yeah.
But thank you for sharing that. It is a very interesting parallel to music, and I can see it. It has to pass the hearing test.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely.
Mhm.
And I will often stop and read it out loud, kind of in the middle, just to, and maybe more than once, just to sort of see, where am I going? Like,
Mhm.
is it, what's happening? Yeah.
I've got a question, if I may.
Oh, sure.
It's for everybody, I think. But this matter has arisen from Charles's Ars Poetica. There's a kind of a caution offered to us to don't stick too closely necessarily to your own personal experience, which makes great sense to me. And yet, you heard what I had to share. It's almost all fairly intimate personal experience,
Right.
because that's what's ready at hand, and I just by default, within the boundaries of the self, I just work with that. It's like what I want to work with. Maybe it's my own therapy in a way, but I think that there's this fascinating dialectical matter between those two perspectives that I'm very intrigued with at the moment.
Yeah. I found when I first started writing poetry, and I can't remember if we talked about this or not, but to me, it's a revelation of the interior, and I'm a very private person. I don't like to show people what's going on inside of me in general. And initially, when I started writing poems, when I started writing poems well, I started adopting personas, voices that I thought, well, nobody could ever accuse this of being Charles Rafferty, the actual person. And that gave me kind of a freedom to explore things that were actually Charles Rafferty, the actual person, without somebody being able to pin it on me. So, I had persona poems, and the titles would be like, the arsonist explains his position to the attorney or something like that.
Yeah.
And it would be a first person poem, but because I've couched it as an obviously fictive character, it felt like nobody would ever come back and laugh at me, for lack of a better phrase. And I find that incredibly freeing, because poetry is a public art. You expect people to read them.
Yeah.
I suppose I'd keep writing even if I could never show anybody a poem, but I know I'm going to show people poems. And so it is a public art. And at least early on, I found that very attractive, this ability to disguise my true intentions or my true thoughts by putting the voice in somebody else's face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have at least 3 therapists in this room. And I wonder if that is why I just tend to write very personal, and then I worry about putting it out. So, and then I try it and see what happens. So, but for me, it's really it's been a lot about personal healing. So, and I think some of that comes also from being a therapist too. I don't know if that's, Jed, part of it with you as well, but
Well, I feel sometimes like I don't worry enough, like I might say something that actually hurts somebody's feelings, or leave someone out there feeling exposed. And I have a certain trepidation about that I think I work into the writing, but I'm risking that. And I, for some reason, I don't want to quit doing that, I don't know.
yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, I
good.
think that poets do both things.
Mhm.
There's sometimes you really want to be intimate, and a reader loves that because they feel like they're part of your life in a way that you're sharing yourself with it. And Jed, I really loved your poems of grief about your father. I just, it brought me into my own grief of people I've been close to that I've died. And there's some gorgeous lines in there, and we were with you. And yet, Charles, when you read your poems with, the way you did them, I was just as involved as in your poems for different reasons, because, and I love that you said you can be anyone or anything when you're writing your poems, and you're protected in the metaphor of the poem almost. So both work, I remember when my husband died many years ago, I was writing poems of, about that whole process. And I found that using the I somehow was limited. But when I became the widow, I could say all kinds of things that I couldn't say as I, and I found that really, freeing.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And I found the humorous moments in that I would not have found in the I.
Mm-hmm.
What's the one, the widow checks or
the widow discovers her tires are bald when the check engine light comes on.
yeah. that poem has stayed with me.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I want to find that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anybody else? I know people write personal poems. I know some of the people here. But yeah, what's your experience with that? How does it work for you? Does anybody else want to say or?
I never met a four I didn't like.
Who's that? Oh,
Julia.
hi. Uh-huh.
Like,
So yeah, do you want to say any more?
not necessarily. It's just something that came to me last night, and I thought of it when Perry was speaking.
Thank
I
you.
think it might be part of a poem coming. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I do a lot of my writing in the middle of the night when I'm doing my meditation practices,
Wow.
getting comfortable dealing with my condition. And I usually don't want to get up and write anything down. So I've started teaching myself how to just remember what comes to me. And hopefully the next day will come back or still be there.
Mhm.
And often there will be a poem that comes from that. So it's a process.
Mm.
But it's all very personal because, you know, it's all about me. And I've been heartened by how many people have responded to the small things that I've written,
yeah.
indicating that my words brought them some
Mhm.
degree of comfort or interest. Surprising and very heartening.
Mm. Yeah. Do you if you want to put your work into the chat, so people might know where to find it, and
Oh,
And
It's
also-
really not anywhere, but when I send it out to friends. I've never really been published.
oh,
So
wow.
a couple of friends have posted things on their blogs, but
Mm.
yeah,
Oh.
I'm new to all of the dissemination. I've written poetry since I was a little girl, but I'm new to the dissemination of the material out into the
Mhm.
public eye,
Oh.
so to speak.
Right. That's a mouthful, right? It's hard. It's a hard thing. Yeah. At least I have found. Yeah. So, well, thanks for saying that. Yeah. I'm tempted to ask you to read something, but I don't want to put you on the spot either. So,
Well, I think there's a lot of people here who would like to share.
well, so thank you for that too. Yeah. So, who else might want to say something?
I actually had a question on a slightly different topic, if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah.
You can hear me okay?
yeah.
Mhm. Perfectly.
So Charles, you said there was a line in your Ars Poetica about the impulse that starts a poem is not enough to finish it. I don't think I jotted that down quite right, but that's what I noted down. And I was thinking, is that something, how does that work in your own poetry? Do you find that when you write a poem, it takes you to somewhere you didn't expect? Or do you ever see the ending to the poem when you start writing it? And this is actually a question for Jed too. I'd be curious to know how it works for you.
Yeah. I rarely know where the poem is going to end. In fact, I feel like if I know where it's going to end, it's going to be a crappy poem, because I think the whole point of the poem is you have to arrive at some kind of discovery, something that you couldn't have said before you wrote the poem, which is kind of a paradox. Like, how can you say something that you don't know how to say? It's all coming out of your head. And I at different points in my life, I've found formal poetry very helpful in that regard, imposing some kind of constraint on the material that forces me to make choices that I wouldn't have made if there were no constraints. So, you know, you get you're rhyming a poem, and you have bazooka is your rhyme word, and you know what else are you going to rhyme with bazooka? That you don't have that many choices. You know, hookah, palooka, whatever. But
Hookah.
you know, if yeah, if you're writing a love poem and bazooka is one of your rhyme words and you actually get yourself out of that trap, that's got to be a discovery. That's the form of the poem pushing you in a direction that your conscious mind wouldn't have gone in without that prodding. And so I feel that's super important, to be able to surprise yourself. But how do you surprise yourself? One way is imposing forms on your material that you're not comfortable with. In fact, if you're comfortable with the form, you're probably not generating a poem that will be surprising. It might be a good poem, but it's not good. I feel like I set the bar impossibly high, and in saying this, I don't want to imply that I have reached the bar, but I want to write the poem that's remembered for 500 years, not the poem that's remembered for 5 weeks. And in order to do that, I think it has to be monumentally surprising. And the first thought in that regard is probably the worst thought, because that's the thought everybody has. So the trick is, like, how do we find a way to surprise ourselves? Frost talks about this. He says, no tears in the reader, no tears in the no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, which is, I think, a way of saying, if you can't figure out a way to jolt yourself, the reader is going to pick up on that right away and probably think, well, I've heard this before. It's in the air. It's a conventional thought or a conventional sound. And as poets, I think we have to find a way to say something truly surprising, which is really hard. I'm not so sure I've done it yet. Most poets do it maybe 3 or 4 times in their life.
Yeah.
And the rest is crap, which is funny saying that, that Shakespeare, most of Shakespeare is bad, but it probably is. There's a few nuggets that we all will remember for centuries more, and the rest will fall away, and we'll be okay. I want to write that poem that continues on.
Wow.
I'm sorry, Katie. I'm sure that was a terrible answer.
No, not at all.
I think it's a great answer, and I think about the long half-life of the poem. I want it to be around for somebody to come upon some long time from now when I'm long gone and relate to it, like, it crosses space and time by that kind of magic of its maybe, really having that truth ring to it. And it is a difficult matter about surprise on the one hand, and that little bit of sort of anticipatableness that the musicality gives it. Like, there's a dance between the predictable and the utter surprise that we try to get. I think it was Patricia Smith maybe who said in a reading once a few years ago that if she doesn't feel scared as she gets farther along into whatever she's writing, she knows it isn't going to really be worth it. It's similar to what you're saying, Charles, I think, about if you don't if you aren't deeply challenging yourself and discovering something you don't know yet, if you aren't just exploring, going where you wouldn't ordinarily go, how are you going to help a reader get someplace worth getting? So I resonate so strongly with what Charles was saying too. And I don't know where a poem is going to wind up, and I don't want to know. I want to. It's a meditation, adventure, exploration. God knows where it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's
Thank you.
yeah. So let's see. So Ginny says, Jed, I think it's the small, precise details that make your poems authentic and exciting. And Leslie says, Robert Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. Ginny says also, Charles, your poetry is not conventional. Its originality makes it memorable.
Mm-hmm.
And Barbara says, thank you for sharing the glow of your own lives with us.
Wow.
And so there's one more question here in the chat. I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone else's questions, but and then we'll have some closing poems. But Rod, you put a question in, and I wonder if you want to say a little more about it. You have a question in the chat. Let's close up with that one.
Well, I was interested in what Charles was saying about the sound of his poems and when he's actually composing them and making that, little mumbling when the family's asleep. But it always raises this question for me: do you think of your poem primarily as the poem in the reader's ear, the audience's ear, or is it the poem on the page? Now, I know it's obviously going to have to be both in the world, but if you were stuck with one choice, having your poems, printed out on a page to last for eternity, or on let's say a CD that could be listened to for eternity, which would you go with?
Well,
why?
Yeah, I don't like that question, because I don't think my either answer is a good one, but definitely the sound of the poem is better. I mean, because I'm writing prose poems now, I don't really care what they look like on the page. You could have a 1-inch version of the poem, or a 5-inch wide version of the poem.
Mhm.
It's all the same to me. I don't care where the breaks occur, because it's prose poetry. But I do care deeply about the way it sounds.
Yeah.
So if I had to make a choice, it's the recording versus the page version.
Yeah.
What would you say to that, Jed?
I think of the writing, whether, however it's laid out, as a kind of score for the reader to work from, to reproduce the music of the poem, the sound, the song of the poem.
Mhm.
So yeah, however you score it, you hope that, you've done it in a way that somebody picks up and reads it out loud. It's like it comes out kind of close to the way you heard it, Yeah.
Mm. Does anybody else want to say anything about that? It's a really interesting idea. I was thinking, I like to have it in my hand and read it many times. That's something to soak it in. And I think it would be hard for me if it was just hearing it. So I like the combination of having it on the page in a book, or, anywhere, as well as hearing it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's kind of a both and thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me read what Mary Marcia wrote here. There's surprise and collision in the prose, but there is such emphasis on word and phrase in lyric, leading to revelation, which is the surprise, perhaps. That's interesting. So yeah, we're all kind of wishing we could write like the other person, I think.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, it's great to think of, like, at least I feel that way, but
Oh, totally. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm always envious of other poets' productions. And an early hero of mine was James Dickey, in that he had this super high bar. Yeah, I don't know if it's true or not, but he claimed that he assumed that the first 50 ways he tried every line would be incorrect, which is a way of saying that he did at least 50 drafts of every poem, which when I was 18, 19, 20, that seemed inconceivable to me. Like, how could you ever do 50 drafts of a poem? But now I feel like, how could you not do 50 drafts of a poem? My habit now is I do a draft of several poems every day, and I might do that for 3 or 4 months, or even years, and it's because I'm only caring about, like, what does this sound like? I feel like I'm going down a rat hole here, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into these things that sound so perfect, right? That
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and well, if I could continue on Dickey for just a second, I love James Dickey, like his early work. If you've ever read like his selected poems that ends in 1967, that is like a rock solid book. It's one of the best books ever written. And then after that, he has this horrible downfall where, he did something really brave, where he said, I don't want to keep writing the same poem over and over again. He was famous for writing these 3-beat and 4-beat lines, like The Heaven of Animals and Cherry Log Road, which are fantastic poems. But according to Dickey himself, he started to grow bored with producing those poems. He felt like he could go on forever, and he did a radical change in the way he composed. And briefly, he had incredible poems. The Sheep Child, I don't know if you know it, It's maybe the best poem in the language about fucking sheep. It's like that poem is his best poem ever. And I think he only gets to that point by making a radical departure. And so I admire him for that. But shortly thereafter, I mean, he kept making these radical departures, and I liked his poetry less and less. But he was also, you know, a terrible alcoholic. I'm sure that played
wasn't
into his
helping him,
downfall.
yeah. Well, God, you know, I could just, we're really just getting started here, but I think the time that we have allotted is probably coming to an end. So, just fabulous. So why don't both of you read something to take us out? And while you're getting ready for that, I just want to thank everybody so much for coming. And really from so far and wide, from Scotland, from Connecticut, from, why don't you say where else? From let's see, Rob, Massachusetts. Yeah. Anyone else?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. Santa Barbara.
Yay.
Seattle.
Seattle. All right.
What a big room.
Really big room. Thank you all so much. It's been really wonderful. And so I'll and New Jersey. Yeah. So so let's take us out with a poem from each one of you, and then we'll reconvene in at late August.
Oh, you want me to go first, Charles, because you went first the first time around? Okay. Here's a little poem called Tiny Violets. Behind my childhood house was an alley. The concrete cracked, crumbling, humbled. Small plants grew in the fissures, sometimes flowering. I called the bluish blooms tiny violets. What did I know? I knew life would take any opening, that rain seeped through the fractures, and that under those seams the earth breathed. You know what I wish? That these streets would split wide, vines pressing up from the deep roots in the imprisoned dirt, stems fat as green anacondas, and the leaves spread fast as dream, broad as executioners' blades shadowing our heads. We'd know we were saved each time we could see the great blue blossom of sky.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Jed. I'll go ahead and read a poem called "The Problem with Sappho." And Sappho is a Greek poet, an ancient Greek poet, and famously, we have only one complete poem of hers in existence. The rest of what we know of her is just fragments from various sources and anthologies. So this poem is called "The Problem with Sappho." Only one complete poem remains. The rest of it is berries left in the bramble after a visit from midday starlings. For years, I couldn't understand how this redaction moved anyone to tears. She was a dampness in the matchbook. But the world is patient. Eventually, the diamond travels from the mantle to the finger of the woman you love. Eventually, the light from an exploded star arrives to confirm the emperor's power. It's clear now that a very old bruise can tell us how hard someone was punched. The detective solves a murder by the help of a single hair. Archaeologists find a molar and build a face to fit it.
Wow. Well, thank you again. And there will be a YouTube recording of this reading. Will go up online. And I will let everybody know. And then whoever isn't on my list, Charles and Jed can let you know about that in case you want to access that. So with that, I hate to end. We could really go on for quite a long time, but
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Phyllis,
Thank you, Phyllis and Jed.
and thank
Thank
us
you.
for putting this together. It's so
Oh.
wonderful of you to do
Wonderful.
that, bring poets together in a little conversation. That's great.
it's been
Yeah.
such an amazing experience, and the Grayson poets are
Yay.
it's grace personified. I just it's been such an honor, really.
And you're one of them.
Oh
Yeah.
well. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I don't almost think of it that way, but thank you. So
Thank you very
yeah,
much.
it's
And
gonna be hard to finish tonight, but
Yeah.
yeah.
thank you, Jed and Charles. Your poems were wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
so
what
much.
an
It's
amazing experience. Yeah.
Be well, everyone. Be well.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody. Yeah. Take care.